My sister changed my newborn's name while I was in labor, then reported us to CPS for abuse so she could keep him herself. When I begged her to stop, she screamed, "Leonardo was mine from the beginning. You killed my baby, so I took yours." I stayed silent. That was 5 months ago. Last night, she stood barefoot in the rain outside our house, clutching a photo of DiCaprio and whispering, "He was supposed to be mine." I decided to name my son Leonardo to honor my late childhood best friend who passed a couple of years ago. Everyone at the shower thought it was sweet, except my sister Casey, who stood up and slammed her palms on the table when she heard the name. "That's my baby name. You know how much I love Leonardo DiCaprio and plan to name my baby that." We tried to tell Casey she wasn't even in a relationship, much less pregnant, but she wasn't having it. She yelled that we were traitors, then packed her things and left with an announcement. "See you all in court." 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail giving me 24 hours to relinquish the name or face consequences. My family called an emergency intervention. We all sat down with Casey in Mom's living room that evening and tried gently explaining why I wouldn't be giving up the name. Casey's face was like an angry tomato. She kept interrupting to tell me how my dead friend would understand, how this has been her only dream in life ever since she was a little girl. We stood our ground, and after proving to her through one of my lawyer friends that she couldn't go to court over a baby name, she ended up giving us an ultimatum. The name was hers, or she'd got no contact with us. We all simultaneously pointed at the door. Her eyes went when we called the bluff, and in this angry, defeated tone she said, "Fine, you can have the stupid name." We thought that was it because we didn't hear from her at all for the next 3 months, but then my labor day came. I was literally giving birth when Casey burst through the door holding a teddy bear and shouting, "Michael is here!" Our whole family, including the nurses, looked confused. My husband Samuel asked what she meant. That's when Casey beamed and rubbed her flat stomach. "I'm pregnant too. You said I couldn't have the name because I wasn't pregnant, so I went out and became pregnant." Problem solved. We stared at her like she had 5 heads. Security removed her while she screamed about fairness. An hour later, I was holding my son for the first time. A nurse came in looking uncomfortable. "There's been an issue with your paperwork. It says here the baby's name is Michael." My husband jumped up like a hawk. He investigated while I held Leonardo and found out the hospital documents were different from what we submitted. Casey had actually tried to officially change our baby's name while I was in active labor. The hospital fixed it, but the message was done. Casey was determined. The next morning, while we were still recovering, my brother called. "Casey's at the hospital. She's hurt really badly." Turns out Casey had woken up at 5 a.m. and had been filing name claims, then driving to every courthouse in the entire state trying to get someone to legally grant her the name Leonardo. She barely slept and spent all day without eating and drinking, leading to her being so tired and dehydrated that she suffered a sunstroke before collapsing on the courthouse steps. She fell straight onto her belly and started miscarrying. She was rushed to the nearest hospital where they had to IV fluids and nutrients into her. The moment she was lucid again, she called me directly from the hospital, yelling that I culled her baby by forcing her to fight for what was rightfully hers. "Leonardo was mine," she sobbed. "How does it feel to know an innocent baby is dead because of you?" I hung up without responding. 3 weeks later, I was breastfeeding when Samuel's phone rang. It was Child Protective Services. Someone had reported us for child abuse and neglect. The caseworker rattled off allegations that made my blood run cold. Samuel was apparently violent towards the baby. His juvenile record from a bar fight when he was 17 was cited. My dad, who lived with us, was also mentioned as a threat. His old teaching scandal, where a student accused him of inappropriate behavior before admitting she lied, was also cited. They even mentioned the house being unsafe for a newborn. While we were still reeling from the call, my neighbor texted me screenshots from our local Facebook group. Casey had written this long post about making the brave decision to report abuse she'd witnessed going on in our home, painting herself as a hero, saving a baby from danger. 20 minutes later, I let the workers, thinking seeing our clean house would end this nightmare. The caseworker checked the nursery, the baby supplies, Leonardo sleeping peacefully, but then she saw my dad in the kitchen. "Is this the grandfather mentioned in the report?" She pulled out her paperwork. "The one with the teaching scandal?" I explained frantically that a student had lied and later admitted it, but the caseworker's face had already changed. "With your husband's juvenile assault record and this, we have to follow protocol." I'm sorry, I couldn't breathe. I watched the caseworker take my baby and carry him out. "He'll be with family," she said. "Your sister seems very prepared. She already had a nursery ready." Of course she did. She'd probably set it up the day after the baby shower. Our lawyer said emergency custody hearings could take time. The investigation cleared us, but bureaucracy moved slowly. In the meantime, Casey had our son. She was posting photos on Instagram calling him my sweet Leonardo, while I sat at home pumping milk for a baby I couldn't hold. I stared at my phone screen, reading the caseworker's email for the 10th time. The investigation was complete. They found no evidence of abuse, but the emergency custody order would remain in effect until the formal hearing. That could take weeks, maybe months. Meanwhile, my sister had my baby. The doorbell rang. I dragged myself from the couch, still wearing the same milk-stained shirt from yesterday. My neighbor stood there holding a casserole dish. "I saw what happened," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "That woman who took your baby, she was here last week asking questions about you. I thought she was just being a concerned aunt." My hands shook as I took the dish. "What kind of questions?" "About your routines, when your husband gets home, if your dad helps with the baby." She even asked if I'd ever heard arguing. She shifted uncomfortably. "I told her you were wonderful parents. I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was gathering ammunition." After she left, I called our lawyer again. He explained that family placements were prioritized in emergency custody situations. Since Casey had prepared a nursery and passed the home inspection, she was considered suitable. The fact that she'd orchestrated the whole thing didn't matter without proof. Samuel came home early from work, his face drawn. His boss had called him in after seeing Casey's Facebook posts. Even though Samuel explained the situation, damage was done. People were whispering. His juvenile record, which had never mattered before, suddenly made him look dangerous in light of the allegations. That evening, Mom called. Her voice was strained. "I went to see Casey. She has the baby dressed in all new clothes. She's calling him Leonardo and won't let me hold him unless I call him that too." "Did she say anything about giving him back?" "She said you should have just let her have the name. She kept saying this was meant to be, that losing her baby was a sign that Leonardo was destined to be hers." Mom's voice cracked. "I don't recognize my own daughter anymore." I pumped milk again that night, storing it in a freezer that was getting fuller by the day. My body didn't understand that my baby was gone. Every 3 hours, like clockwork, I'd feel the letdown reflex and have to pump or risk mastitis. Each session was torture, a physical reminder of what I'd lost. The next morning, I decided to document everything. I created a timeline starting from the baby shower, including every interaction, every threat, every manipulative move Casey had made. Samuel helped me gather screenshots of her social media posts, especially the ones from before Leonardo was born, where she talked about her future baby Leonardo. My dad, who'd been quiet since the CPS visit, finally spoke up at dinner. "I keep thinking about that teaching scandal. Even though Sarah admitted she lied, it's still on my record, just like Samuel's bar fight. These things follow you forever." He pushed his food around his plate. "Maybe I should move out temporarily. It might help your case." "Absolutely not," Samuel said firmly. "We're not letting her tear this family apart. We did nothing wrong." But doubt crept in during the dark hours. What if the caseworker was right to be concerned? What if our past mistakes, even ones we'd been cleared of, made us unfit parents? I found myself second-guessing every parenting decision I'd made in Leonardo's 3 short weeks of life. On day 4 of the separation, I drove past Casey's apartment complex. I didn't plan to to stop, just needed to be close to my baby. But then I saw her car wasn't there. My heart raced. I called Mom. Oh, she mentioned taking Leonardo to a baby yoga class this morning, Mom said. She's really throwing herself into this aunt role. Aunt role? She's calling herself his aunt? Well, what else would she call herself? The rage that filled me was volcanic. I drove to the baby yoga studio and watched through the window. There was Casey, holding my baby, surrounded by other mothers who had no idea they were witnessing a kidnapping in slow motion. Leonardo was fussing, probably hungry. Did she even have formula? Was she giving him the pumped milk I'd sent through Mom? I wanted to burst in, to scream the truth, but I knew that would only hurt our case. Instead, I took photos through the window. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. The lawyer called that afternoon with mixed news. The good news is we've got a hearing date, 3 weeks from now. The bad news is that Casey's filed for temporary guardianship, citing the ongoing investigation and your family's instability. She can't do that. She can try. I wonder what really drives someone to plan a whole kidnapping around a baby name. Casey's timing here seems too perfect. The nursery already set up, knowing exactly which courthouse procedures to follow, having all the right documentation ready. She's claiming you're mentally unstable due to postpartum depression, that you hung up on her when she was miscarrying, showing lack of empathy. She's building a case that she's the more suitable caregiver. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the nursery door, which had stayed closed since they took Leonardo. I hadn't been able to go in there. His smell still lingered, that sweet baby scent that made my arms ache with emptiness. Samuel found me on the nursery floor an hour later, surrounded by Leonardo's unworn clothes. We're going to get him back, he said, pulling me against him. She can't keep this up forever. The truth will come out. But would it? Casey had always been the master manipulator in our family, the one who could cry on cue and twist any situation to her advantage. Even now, she was probably spinning some story about how she was protecting Leonardo from a dangerous situation. My milk supply was starting to decrease from the stress. The lactation consultant I called said it was normal when separated from baby, but I pumped religiously anyway. It was the only thing I could still do for my son. Mom picked up the milk every other day to take to Casey, who accepted it with fake gratitude and real smugness. She's redecorating his nursery, Mom reported after one visit. Says the one you had wasn't stimulating enough for proper development. She's bought all these educational toys and hired a sleep consultant. The irony burned. Casey, who'd gotten pregnant out of spite and miscarried from her own recklessness, was now playing super aunt with my baby. She was living out her Leonardo DiCaprio fantasy with my Leonardo, the one I'd named for my dead best friend who'd never get to meet him. I started visiting the CPS office daily, bringing new evidence each time. The caseworker, Ms. Patterson, was professional but clearly overwhelmed. Her desk was stacked with files, each representing a family in crisis. She reminded me that the investigation had cleared us, but that the family court judge would make the final custody decision. What about the fact that my sister orchestrated this whole thing? I asked for the 100th time. Without proof of malicious intent, it's considered a good faith report. She saw what she believed were warning signs and reported them. The fact that a family member is willing to provide care during the investigation is actually considered positive. I wanted to scream that there was nothing positive about this nightmare, but I bit my tongue. Emotional outburst would only fuel Casey's postpartum depression narrative. 2 weeks into our separation, Samuel's work situation deteriorated. A client had Googled him and found Casey's Facebook posts. Even though they were lies, the damage to his reputation was real. His boss suggested he take some time off until things were resolved. Unpaid time off we couldn't afford, especially with legal bills mounting. Dad wasn't faring better. He'd returned to substitute teaching to help with expenses, but word had gotten out about the CPS investigation. Even though he'd been cleared in the original scandal years ago, the new allegations brought everything back up. The school district quietly removed him from their substitute list. Casey, meanwhile, was thriving. Her Instagram showed daily updates of her Leonardo hitting all his milestones. First smile that I missed. First time holding his head up that I missed. She'd even started a mommy blog about unexpected parenthood and when family steps up. The hypocrisy was suffocating. She wrote posts about the importance of stable homes while actively destroying ours. She preached about putting children first while traumatizing an infant by separating him from his mother. Every like and supportive comment on her post felt like a knife in my chest. I printed everything. Every post, every comment, every photo where she called him my Leonardo. The stack of evidence grew daily, but would it be enough? The family court system moved at glacial pace while my baby grew and changed without me. 3 days before the hearing, disaster struck. I'd gone to the grocery store trying to maintain some normalcy. When I returned, Samuel was on the front porch with 2 police officers. My heart stopped. There's been another report, he said, his voice hollow. Someone called in a wellness check, said they were concerned about my mental state, that I'd been making threats. The officers were professional but thorough. They asked about weapons in the home, about my mental health history, about whether I'd threatened Casey. Of course I hadn't, but someone had called in claiming to be a concerned neighbor who'd overheard violent threats. We knew it was Casey, but proving it was another matter. The wellness check would go in the official record. Another mark against us, another piece of her carefully constructed narrative that we were unstable and dangerous. That night, I finally broke down completely. The ugly cry that had been building for weeks came pouring out. Samuel held me as I sobbed about missing Leonardo's first weeks, about my arms that ached to hold him, about the injustice of it all. She's winning, I gasped between sobs. She's taking everything. No, Samuel said firmly. She's desperate. The wellness check, the social media campaign, it's all because she knows the hearing is coming. She knows the truth will come out. But I wasn't sure anymore. Truth seemed like such a fragile thing compared to Casey's elaborate web of lies. She'd turned our love for our son into evidence against us, twisted our past mistakes into present dangers, and painted herself as the hero of a story where she was actually the villain. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stood in Leonardo's nursery, finally able to enter it, and promised him I'd fight. Not with lies or manipulation like Casey, but with truth and love, and the fierce determination of a mother who'd been separated from her baby for far too long. Tomorrow would begin the battle to bring him home. I just prayed it would be enough. The morning of the hearing arrived with a stomach-churning mix of hope and dread. I dressed carefully in my most conservative outfit while Samuel adjusted his tie for the 5th time. Dad had insisted on coming despite our protests about how it might look. We arrived at the family services building an hour early, our folder of evidence clutched in my trembling hands. Casey was already there, sitting in the waiting area with Leonardo in a designer stroller. She'd dressed him in an outfit I'd never seen before, complete with tiny shoes he didn't need. My body reacted instantly to seeing my son, milk letting down despite my efforts to wean. I pressed my arms against my chest, trying to hide the growing wet spots on my blouse. The hearing officer called us into a conference room. Ms. Patterson was there along with Casey's caseworker and a supervisor I hadn't met before. Casey immediately launched into her performance, dabbing at dry eyes while describing her concerns about our home environment. She presented photos of Leonardo thriving in her care, documentation of his doctor visits, and glowing reports from the infant development specialist she'd hired. When it was our turn, I spread out our evidence methodically. The timeline showed Casey's obsession with the name Leonardo dating back years. Screenshots revealed her pregnancy announcement came just days after visiting fertility clinics. Most damning was a text she'd sent to a friend bragging about her plan to get custody through CPS reports. The supervisor examined everything carefully. She asked pointed questions about the timing of Casey's nursery preparation and her sudden expertise in infant care. For the first time, I saw doubt creep into Ms. Patterson's expression. Then Casey played her trump card. She produced a letter from a child psychologist stating that Leonardo had shown signs of attachment to her, and that disrupting this bond could cause psychological harm. The hearing officer's face grew concerned as she read it. The meeting ended without resolution. They needed time to review everything and consult with additional experts. Another 2 weeks minimum before a decision. I left that building feeling hollowed out, watching Casey wheel my son away while cooing at him like he'd always been hers. That afternoon, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Doherty, knocked on our door. She held a manila envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photos she'd taken of Casey visiting our house repeatedly in the weeks before Leonardo's birth, always when we weren't home. In several shots, Casey was clearly photographing our property and peering through windows. Mrs. Doherty had more. She'd kept a detailed log after finding Casey's behavior suspicious. Dates, times, and descriptions of Casey asking other neighbors about our schedules, our habits, even which pediatrician we'd chosen. She'd been building her case for months. We immediately sent the new evidence to our lawyer, who forwarded it to the family services supervisor. But Casey must have had sources inside the system because 2 days later, she escalated dramatically. I was at the grocery store when my phone exploded with notifications. Casey had gone live on social media, sitting in what looked like a hospital waiting room. She claimed I'd been stalking her, showing up at Leonardo's activities and threatening her. She held up a restraining order application, tearfully explaining how she feared for Leonardo's safety. The video went viral in our community. People who didn't know the full story saw a devoted caregiver protecting an innocent baby from an unstable birth mother. Comments poured in supporting her, calling me dangerous, suggesting I needed psychiatric help. Some even praised Casey for stepping up when family failed. Samuel found me in the parking lot, hyperventilating in my car. He'd rushed from work after seeing the video. Together we watched Casey's performance again, noting the calculated pauses, the perfectly timed tears. Casey's playing chess while everyone else thought they were having a family dinner. Hiring sleep consultants for a stolen baby while blogging about unexpected parenthood takes a special kind of nerve that would make reality TV villains take notes. She'd even positioned Leonardo in frame, though he was peacefully sleeping through her dramatics. Our lawyer called within the hour. The restraining order application was real, but flimsy. Casey had twisted my presence at the baby yoga studio into stalking, claiming I'd been following her for weeks. She'd submitted photos of me driving past her apartment complex, conveniently omitting that it was on the route to the grocery store. The temporary order was denied, but the damage was done. The supervisor called to express concern about the escalating situation. Any aggressive behavior from us, even perceived, could jeopardize our case. We were trapped between fighting for our son and appearing unstable if we fought too hard. Mom became our unexpected ally. She'd been playing neutral to maintain access to Leonardo, but Casey's latest stunt pushed her over the edge. She started documenting everything during her visits, using her phone to secretly record Casey's unguarded moments. What she discovered was disturbing. Casey had essentially erased us from Leonardo's existence. She'd created a nursery that looked nothing like ours, filled with Leonardo DiCaprio memorabilia. She referred to herself as Mama, and had taught the daycare workers that she was his mother. When Mom corrected her, Casey flew into a rage, threatening to cut off visits. Mom also noticed practical problems. Casey was overwhelmed by the actual work of caring for an infant. She'd hired a night nanny, a day nanny, and various specialists to handle everything from feeding to diaper changes. When left alone with Leonardo for even short periods, she became frantic, calling Mom for help with basic tasks. During one visit, Mom found Leonardo with a severe diaper rash that had clearly been developing for days. Casey hadn't noticed because she rarely changed him herself. Mom documented everything with photos and immediately took him to urgent care, where the doctor noted the neglect in medical records. We submitted this new evidence, but the system moved with maddening slowness. Every day that passed was another day of Leonardo's life I missed. He was 3 months old now, and I'd been his mother for exactly 3 weeks. The financial pressure mounted. Samuel's unpaid leave had turned into a layoff when his company decided the controversy was too much. Dad's substitute teaching income was gone. We were burning through savings paying for lawyers while Casey posted about expensive baby classes and designer outfits. Then came an unexpected break. Casey's night nanny Victoria reached out through Mom. She'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with the situation after realizing Leonardo wasn't actually Casey's baby. She'd kept detailed notes about Casey's behavior, including middle-of-the-night rants about how she deserved Leonardo more than I did. Victoria revealed something crucial. Casey had been planning this since before she got pregnant. She'd researched custody laws, consulted with family lawyers under false pretenses, and even attended foster parent training to understand the system. The pregnancy had been intentional, meant to strengthen her claim, and when she lost that baby, she'd pivoted to taking mine. We met Victoria at a coffee shop where she handed over copies of her notes. She was terrified of losing her nanny license if Casey found out, but her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. She described incidents where Casey would practice her concerned aunt performance in the mirror, rehearsing lines she'd later use with CPS. The supervisor agreed to an emergency review based on Victoria's testimony, but when the meeting day arrived, Victoria was nowhere to be found. She'd left town suddenly, texting Mom that she couldn't risk her career. Without her direct testimony, her notes were just hearsay. Casey knew we'd found her weakness. She hired a new night nanny and began posting about the previous one's instability and false allegations. She painted herself as a victim of a disgruntled employee, garnering more sympathy from her growing social media following. The smear campaign intensified. Casey created a blog called Protecting Leonardo, where she documented her version of events. She wrote posts about recognizing signs of abuse, dealing with unstable family members, and the challenges of emergency caregiving. Each entry twisted reality a little more, building a narrative where she was the hero saving a baby from neglectful parents. Local parenting groups started sharing her posts. Some invited her to speak about child safety. She accepted eagerly, showing up with Leonardo like a prop while spreading lies about our family. People who'd known us for years began avoiding us, unsure what to believe. I started having panic attacks. The grocery store became a minefield of judging looks and whispered conversations. Samuel couldn't find new work because every employer Googled him and found Casey's posts. Dad retreated into himself, spending days in his room to avoid making things worse for us. Our lawyer suggested mediation. Maybe if we could get Casey in a room with a neutral party, we could work something out. But Casey refused, claiming she feared for her safety. She filed another report stating we'd been driving by her apartment at night, which was impossible to disprove since we couldn't account for every moment. The investigation into that claim meant more delays. More weeks of Leonardo growing and changing without us. Mom reported he'd started solid foods, was sitting up on his own, and had discovered his feet. All milestones I should have witnessed, but experienced secondhand through Mom's secret photos. One evening, Samuel's cousin called with a strange story. She'd been at a baby store when she overheard Casey talking to another woman about adoption lawyers. Casey was asking about the process of adopting a child already in your care, how long it took, what rights birth parents retained. The cousin managed to record part of the conversation on her phone. This was the evidence we needed to show Casey's true intentions. She wasn't just playing caregiver until the system sorted things out. She was actively trying to steal our son permanently. But when we submitted the recording, we hit another wall. The audio was too muffled to be conclusive, and Casey claimed she'd been asking for a friend in a similar situation. The supervisor scheduled another hearing, warning it might be the last chance to resolve things before long-term custody decisions were made. We spent sleepless nights preparing, organizing evidence, practicing what we'd say, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing a rigged game where Casey kept changing the rules. A week before the hearing, disaster struck again. Dad had gone for a walk to clear his head when he encountered one of Casey's friends friends at the park. She began recording him, asking provocative questions about the old teaching scandal. Dad tried to leave, but she followed, getting increasingly aggressive. When he finally raised his voice telling her to stop, she had what she wanted: video of him yelling at a woman in public. The edited clip hit social media within hours. It showed Dad appearing aggressive while the woman cowered away. Casey reshared it with commentary about patterns of violence in our household, how she tried to protect Leonardo from this toxic environment. The post went viral locally, with people calling for criminal charges. We hired a digital forensics expert who proved the video was edited, but the truth spread slower than the lie. Dad was devastated, talking about leaving the state to stop hurting our case. We begged him to stay, but I could see him breaking under the weight of public humiliation. Samuel discovered Casey had joined several online groups for adoptive parents, presenting herself as someone navigating the foster to adopt process. She shared photos of Leonardo with captions about their journey together and the challenges of dealing with birth family issues. Group members offered support and advice, not knowing they were enabling a kidnapping. 3 days before the hearing, Mom made a risky move. She convinced Casey to let her babysit while Casey attended a very important meeting. Once alone with Leonardo, Mom drove him to our house. For 3 precious hours, I held my son. He'd changed so much. His face had lost the newborn roundness, his eyes focused and tracked movement. But when I held him, he settled against me like he remembered. I fed him a bottle of formula since my milk had dried up, changed his diaper, sang the lullabies I'd planned during pregnancy. Samuel took hundreds of photos and videos, evidence that we could parent our son. When Mom had to take him back, I thought my heart would shatter. But those 3 hours had given me something I'd lost: certainty. Leonardo knew me. Despite months apart, he was still my baby. Casey could dress him up and parade him around, but she couldn't erase the bond we'd formed in those first 3 weeks. Mom reported that Casey had been furious about the unauthorized visit, threatening to cut off access entirely, but she needed Mom's help too much to follow through. The nanny situation had become a revolving door. As caregivers realized something was off about the situation, Mom was the only stable presence in Leonardo's life. The morning before the hearing, our lawyer called with disturbing news. Casey had submitted a thick folder of new evidence, including statements from people we'd never heard of claiming to have witnessed concerning behavior. She'd hired a private investigator who'd photographed us at our worst moments: me crying in the car, Samuel looking angry after reading her posts, Dad walking alone looking depressed. Every human moment of struggle had been documented and weaponized. The investigator's report painted a picture of an unstable family unit incapable of caring for a child. Never mind that our instability was caused by having our child stolen. Something's off about how quickly Victoria disappeared after offering to help. She had detailed notes about Casey practicing her performance in mirrors but suddenly fled town when it mattered most. In Casey's narrative, we'd always been unfit. I spent that last night before the hearing in Leonardo's nursery, surrounded by clothes he'd never wear and toys he'd never play with. The room smelled musty now, abandoned. I picked up the stuffed elephant my best friend's mother had sent when she heard about the birth, remembering how I'd planned to tell Leonardo about the friend he was named for. Samuel found me there at dawn, still awake. He wrapped his arms around me as the first light crept through the window. Neither of us spoke about our fears for the day ahead. We'd done everything possible to prepare, but Casey had shown she'd stop at nothing to keep our son. As we dressed for the hearing, I thought about the last 5 months of hell. How a sister's jealousy over a name had spiraled into losing my child, our livelihoods, and our reputations. How the system meant to protect children had been twisted into a weapon against us. How truth seemed powerless against a well-crafted lie. But I also thought about those 3 stolen hours with Leonardo, the way he'd gripped my finger, the little sighs he made while sleeping. He was worth fighting for, worth enduring any humiliation or hardship. I was his mother, and I would never stop fighting to bring him home. We arrived at the family services building to find Casey already there, surrounded by supporters from her online community. She'd turned our custody hearing into a spectacle, complete with matching t-shirts reading Team Leonardo's Safety. My stomach turned at the performance, but I kept my head high as we walked past them. Inside the conference room, the supervisor had arranged seats around a large table. Ms. Patterson was there, along with Casey's caseworker, our lawyer, and several officials I didn't recognize. The stack of evidence in the center of the table looked impossibly large, months of our lives reduced to paper and photographs. Casey entered with Leonardo in a carrier, making a show of checking on him constantly. She dressed him in an outfit covered in little Oscars, a nauseating reminder of her Leonardo DiCaprio obsession. I forced myself not to react, knowing any emotion would be used against me. The supervisor called the meeting to order, her expression grave. She explained that this hearing would determine custody arrangements going forward, that all evidence had been reviewed, and that the best interests of Leonardo were the only consideration. I wanted to scream that his best interests were being with his parents, but I bit my tongue until it bled. What followed was a systematic presentation of evidence from both sides. Casey's team went first, laying out their case with practiced precision. The photos, the reports, the witness statements, all painting us as unfit. They emphasized Samuel's juvenile record, Dad's teaching scandal, my mental instability following the separation, every moment of human frailty magnified into dysfunction. Then came our turn. Our lawyer methodically dismantled Casey's narrative, showing the timeline of her obsession, the calculated nature of her reports, the evidence of planning that predated Leonardo's birth. Mrs. Doherty's photos showed Casey's surveillance. Mom's documentation revealed the reality of Casey's caregiving. The digital forensics exposed the edited videos and manufactured evidence. As the evidence mounted, I watched Casey's carefully composed mask begin to crack. Her supporters couldn't hear what was being presented, but she could. When our lawyer showed texts where she'd bragged about her plan to steal Leonardo, her face flushed. When Mom's recordings of her calling herself Mama played, she shifted uncomfortably. The supervisor asked pointed questions, no longer accepting surface explanations. She wanted to know why Casey had prepared a nursery before reporting abuse, why she'd consulted adoption lawyers while claiming to be temporary caregiver, why multiple nannies had quit citing ethical concerns. Each question chipped away at the hero narrative Casey had constructed. Then came the moment that changed everything. The supervisor produced a document we hadn't seen before. CPS had conducted their own investigation after receiving our evidence, including interviewing former nannies and reviewing Casey's social media history going back years. They'd found posts from 5 years ago where she'd talked about naming her future son Leonardo, complete with nursery plans identical to what she'd created. More damning was their discovery that Casey had been in contact with multiple fertility clinics in the weeks between the baby shower and her pregnancy announcement. She'd undergone emergency IUI treatments, maxing out credit cards in her desperation to get pregnant quickly. The timeline proved she'd gotten pregnant specifically to claim the name Leonardo. The supervisor's voice was stern as she addressed Casey directly. The investigation had revealed a pattern of manipulation and deception incompatible with the best interests of the child. While the initial removal had followed protocol based on the reports filed, it was clear those reports had been fabricated as part of a larger scheme to obtain custody. Casey's composure finally shattered. She burst into tears, not the practiced tears of her performances, but raw, ugly sobs. She ranted about how unfair it was, how she'd loved Leonardo DiCaprio her whole life, how she'd dreamed of having a son with that name since childhood. She accused me of stealing her dream, of forcing her to take extreme measures. The more she talked, the more unhinged she sounded. She revealed details we hadn't known, like hiring someone to plant evidence in our house during a planned visit that fell through. She admitted to coaching witnesses on what to say. She even confessed to deliberately getting pregnant after the baby shower, viewing it as her only chance to claim the name. Her supporters, able to hear her through the thin walls, began filtering out as the reality of what they'd been enabling became clear. By the time Casey finished her meltdown, the waiting room was empty except for our family. The supervisor called for a recess. When we reconvened, the decision was swift. Emergency custody was revoked immediately. Leonardo would be returned to us that day. Casey would have supervised visitation only, pending a full psychological evaluation. The fraudulent reports would be referred for criminal investigation, but the supervisor wasn't done. She addressed us directly, acknowledging the system's failure to protect our family from manipulation. She promised a full review of procedures to prevent similar situations. She also recommended we pursue civil action against Casey for damages, given the documented harm to our reputations and livelihoods. Casey had to be escorted out by security, screaming about conspiracies and favoritism. As she passed our table, she looked at me with such hatred that I instinctively moved closer to Samuel. Even in defeat, she couldn't accept responsibility for what she'd done. An hour later, I sat in a small room as a caseworker brought Leonardo to me. 5 months after he'd been taken, my son was coming home. He was bigger, more alert, but when I picked him up, he settled against me like no time had passed. Samuel wrapped his arms around both of us, and we stood there crying and laughing simultaneously. The ride home felt surreal. Leonardo in his car seat, finally where he belonged. Dad waiting on the porch with tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Doherty and other neighbors who'd supported us gathering to welcome him home. The nursery that had sat empty for months, finally filled with baby sounds. That night, as I rocked Leonardo to sleep in the chair I'd bought while pregnant, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The false allegations, the social media campaigns, the financial ruin, the emotional torture of separation, all because my sister couldn't accept that I'd chosen a name she wanted, but we'd survived. Truth had eventually prevailed, though at tremendous cost. Samuel was still unemployed. Dad's reputation remained damaged, and we'd spent our savings on legal fees. The trauma of having Leonardo stolen would take years to process, yet none of that mattered compared to having our son home. The first week with Leonardo home tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated. His sleep schedule was completely disrupted from Casey's chaotic caregiving. He'd wake screaming every 2 hours, searching for the rotating cast of nannies he'd grown accustomed to. I spent nights walking the halls with him, relearning his cries, his preferences, the way he liked to be held. Samuel tackled the practical challenges. He filed paperwork to have Casey's false reports expunged from our records, contacted his former employer about the truth behind his departure, and began the slow process of rebuilding his professional reputation. Each phone call required explaining the whole sordid story, reliving the nightmare for strangers who held our future in their hands. Dad emerged from his self-imposed isolation gradually. He started by helping with Leonardo during the day while I caught up on sleep. I watched him hold his grandson with trembling hands, whispering apologies for things that weren't his fault. The teaching scandal from years ago had been weaponized against him again, and the wounds were fresh. 3 days after Leonardo came home, packages started arriving. Baby clothes, toys, formula samples, all addressed to Casey at our address. She'd signed us up for every baby registry and subscription service she could find, using our information. The doorbell rang constantly with deliveries we hadn't ordered and couldn't afford to keep. Mom visited daily, bringing groceries and emotional support. She revealed more disturbing details about Casey's time with Leonardo. The designer outfits had been bought on credit cards Casey couldn't pay. The specialist appointments were scheduled but never attended because Casey couldn't handle taking him alone. Casey turned a custody hearing into merch night with Team Leonardo's safety t-shirts. Nothing says I'm stable like making custom clothing for your nephew's kidnapping trial. The blog about her parenting journey had attracted sponsors who were now demanding refunds after learning the truth. We discovered Casey had been telling Leonardo's pediatrician that she was adopting him, that we'd abandoned him due to addiction issues. She'd forged consent forms, created false medical histories, and even listed herself as his primary guardian on insurance forms. Untangling the web of lies required hours on the phone with medical offices, insurance companies, and legal aid. Samuel's cousin forwarded us screenshots from parenting groups where Casey was still active. She'd pivoted her narrative, now claiming we'd manipulated the system to steal Leonardo from her, that she'd been his true mother all along. Some members believed her, offering sympathy and advice on fighting for her baby. Others had started questioning the inconsistencies in her stories. The financial pressure intensified. Our savings were gone, credit cards maxed from legal fees. The mortgage payment loomed while Samuel sent out dozens of job applications daily. His reputation in our industry was tainted by association with the scandal. Employers Googled him and found Casey's posts, the false allegations, the custody battle drama. I returned to work earlier than planned, leaving Leonardo with Dad during my shifts. My body wasn't ready, still recovering from months of stress and separation. Co-workers whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, sharing gossip about the custody battle they'd followed on social media. Some offered genuine support, others kept their distance as if our misfortune was contagious. 2 weeks after the hearing, Casey attempted her first supervised visit. The social worker brought her to our home for a 1-hour session. She arrived wearing a t-shirt with Leonardo DiCaprio's face on it, carrying a gift bag full of movie memorabilia. When I placed Leonardo in her arms, she immediately started calling him Leo, insisting it was a better nickname. The visit deteriorated quickly. Casey criticized how we decorated the nursery, suggested Leonardo looked thinner, implied we weren't stimulating his development properly. When he started fussing, she claimed he was upset because we'd turned him against her. The social worker took notes, professionally neutral but clearly concerned by Casey's behavior. After she left, I found she'd hidden notes throughout our house during bathroom breaks, messages scrawled on scraps of paper tucked behind picture frames, inside books, under couch cushions. They all said variations of the same thing. He's mine. You stole him. This isn't over. Samuel installed security cameras that night. We changed the locks, set up motion sensors, created a safety plan with our neighbors. Mrs. Doherty organized an informal neighborhood watch, with residents keeping eyes out for Casey's car. The community that had been divided by her social media campaign slowly began rallying around us. The supervised visits continued weekly, each one more strained than the last. Casey brought increasingly inappropriate gifts. Adult-sized Leonardo DiCaprio merchandise, DVDs of R-rated movies for when he's older, even a savings bond made out to Leonardo DiCaprio Jr. The social worker documented everything, building a case for terminating visits entirely. During the 4th visit, Casey smuggled in a hidden camera disguised as a teddy bear. Dad noticed the unusual weight when cleaning up afterward and discovered the device. She'd been secretly recording our home, looking for evidence to support new allegations. The police took a report but explained that without proof of intended harm, it was a civil matter. Samuel finally got a job interview with a company 2 hours away. They'd heard about our situation but were willing to look past it. The position paid less than his previous role, and the commute would be brutal, but we couldn't afford to be choosy. He left before dawn for the interview, returning late that evening with cautious optimism. Mom discovered Casey had been visiting Leonardo's old daycare, telling workers she'd be resuming care soon. She'd filled out enrollment paperwork using forged documents, even paid a deposit she couldn't afford. The director contacted us immediately, having followed the custody case in local Facebook groups. Another mess to untangle. Another system Casey had tried to manipulate. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court revealed what we'd always known. Casey showed signs of delusional thinking, narcissistic personality traits, and an inability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Her obsession with Leonardo DiCaprio had morphed into a fixed belief that she was destined to have a son with that name. The evaluator recommended intensive therapy and suspended visitation. Casey's Casey's response was predictable but exhausting. She created new social media accounts to circumvent blocks, posted videos claiming the evaluation was biased, started a petition to reunite Leo with his real mother. Each platform had to be contacted individually to remove content. Each post had to be documented for our growing harassment file. Samuel got the job. The relief was overwhelming, even with the challenges it would bring. We'd have health insurance again, steady income to rebuild our savings. Dad offered to continue watching Leonardo during the day, determined to be useful despite his own struggles with depression from the public humiliation. 3 months after Leonardo came home, we attended a community barbecue. Some neighbors avoided us, others offered quiet support. Children who'd played at our house before weren't allowed over anymore, their parents influenced by lingering doubts from Casey's campaign. We smiled through the awkwardness, determined to reclaim our place in the neighborhood. That night, Casey appeared on our doorstep, violating the no-contact order. She looked disheveled, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. She dropped to her knees on our porch, sobbing about losing everything: her apartment, her job, her friends who'd finally seen through her lies. She begged to see Leonardo one last time, swearing she'd leave us alone forever afterward. Samuel called the police while I watched through the window. Casey rocked back and forth, clutching a photo of Leonardo DiCaprio, mumbling about destiny and stolen dreams. When officers arrived, she didn't resist, seeming almost relieved to be led away. The incident added another violation to her record, another step toward a permanent restraining order. The next morning brought unexpected news. Casey's former landlord contacted us about belongings she'd left behind. Among them was a storage unit key. When we investigated, we found years of obsessive planning, journals detailing her Leonardo DiCaprio fantasies, vision boards of imagined children, printed articles about custody laws and manipulation tactics, evidence of a decade-long delusion we'd never fully grasped. We turned everything over to authorities, hoping it might help prevent her from targeting another family. The detective assigned to our harassment case seemed shocked by the scope of her obsession. He mentioned similar cases he'd seen, assured us we'd done everything right in documenting her behavior. 6 months passed. Samuel adjusted to his long commute, finding podcasts to make the drive bearable. Dad started volunteering at the library, slowly rebuilding his confidence away from teaching. I returned to full-time work, cherishing evenings with Leonardo even more after our separation. The financial strain eased gradually, though the debt would take years to eliminate. Casey's supervised visits never resumed. She'd been ordered to complete therapy before any contact could be considered, but she refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Mom heard through family gossip that she'd moved to another state, telling people there about the son who'd been stolen from her. The cycle continuing elsewhere, though authorities had been notified. Leonardo grew and thrived, unaware of the drama surrounding his early months. He learned to crawl in the nursery Casey had called inadequate, took his first steps in the home she'd tried to have him removed from. His first word was Dada, directed at Samuel during a quiet Sunday morning. Simple moments made precious by how close we'd come to losing them. The community gradually forgot the scandal, moving on to newer gossip. Some relationships never recovered, trust broken by how quickly people believed lies. But we'd found our true supporters, the ones who'd stood by us when it mattered. Mrs. Doherty became Leonardo's honorary grandmother, spoiling him with homemade treats and fierce protection. 1 year after the custody battle ended, I finally entered Leonardo's nursery without feeling the ghost of those empty months. The room was cluttered with toys, books, evidence of a child well loved and present. I picked up the stuffed elephant from my late friend's mother, telling Leonardo the story I'd always planned to share about his namesake. Samuel found me there later, Leonardo asleep in my arms. We sat together in the gathering dusk, no words needed. Our son was home, our family intact despite everything. The scars would always be there, trust harder to give, innocence lost, but we'd survived Casey's obsession, protected our child, found strength we didn't know we possessed. As I tucked Leonardo into his crib that night, I thought about the name that had started everything. Such a simple choice, honoring a lost friend, had unleashed such chaos. But watching my son sleep peacefully, safe in his own room, I knew I wouldn't change anything. He was Leonardo, named for love and memory, not for an actor or anyone else's dreams. The future stretched ahead with normal challenges: teething, potty training, school decisions, mundane parental concerns that felt like gifts after what we'd endured. Casey remained a shadow at the edges, a cautionary tale about obsession and entitlement, but she no longer had power over our lives. We learned to document everything, trust carefully, and cherish the ordinary moments others took for granted. Our son would grow up knowing he was fought for, protected, loved beyond measure. That was the only truth that mattered now. Phew, thanks for hanging out with me and diving into all this weird stuff. Kinda wild, right? Appreciate you being here for the ride. Till next time, stay curious out there. Like the video, it helps more than you think.